At some point in the last year, something made you cry. Maybe it was obvious. A loss, a goodbye, a piece of news that hit harder than you expected. Maybe it was embarrassingly small. A song that came on at the wrong moment. A scene in a film you'd already seen 3 times. A stranger's kindness on a day when you weren't expecting it. Maybe you cried at something you couldn't explain at all and spent the next few minutes trying to reconstruct what exactly had broken through. Whatever it was, your eyes produced tears, not because something was in them, not because the air was dry, because you felt something. And that, the production of tears in response to an emotional state rather than a physical one, is something no other animal on Earth does. Not dolphins, not elephants, not chimpanzees, despite sharing 98.7% of your DNA. In the entire history of life on this planet, emotional tears appear to have evolved exactly once. In you. The question of why is one of the most genuinely unresolved puzzles in evolutionary biology. Crying is metabolically costly. It impairs vision at exactly the moment vulnerability is highest. It signals emotional state to anyone nearby, which in an environment full of predators and rival groups is not obviously advantageous. And yet, it persisted. Across every human culture ever documented, across every era of human history, emotional crying appears as a universal feature of human experience. Every society has it. No society has eliminated it. Whatever it costs, something about it has been worth the cost consistently for long enough that it became as fundamental to the human experience as language or laughter. Understanding why requires going deeper than the tears themselves, into the cognitive evolution that made emotional crying not just possible, but apparently necessary. Start with what crying actually is biologically. Humans produce 3 distinct types of tears. Basal tears, the continuous thin film that keeps the eye lubricated. Reflex tears, produced in response to irritants, smoke, onions, foreign objects. And emotional tears, produced specifically in response to psychological states, and chemically distinct from the other 2. Emotional tears contain higher concentrations of stress hormones, including prolactin, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and leucine enkephalin, a natural painkiller. They are not simply excess moisture. They are a specific secretion triggered by specific neurological events, containing a specific chemical payload that is different from tears produced by any other cause. The body, in other words, doesn't just happen to cry when you're emotional, it has a dedicated system for producing a specific kind of tear in response to emotional states. That system didn't appear by accident. It was selected for. Something about producing those specific chemicals through that specific mechanism at that specific moment was useful enough to survive. The most compelling evolutionary explanation centers on what emotional tears do to other people. In 2011, researchers at the Weizmann Institute in Israel published a study that found something remarkable: the chemical composition of emotional tears, when exposed to men who couldn't see them, measurably reduced testosterone levels and self-reported sexual arousal. The tears were communicating something chemically, beneath conscious awareness, that words cannot easily convey. A subsequent body of research has consistently found that visible crying in another person triggers specific responses in observers: increased empathy, reduced aggression, heightened caregiving impulses. Tears don't just express emotion, they regulate the emotional and behavioral states of the people around you. They are, in the most precise biological sense, a social signal, one that evolved not primarily for the crier, but for the people watching. This makes evolutionary sense only in the context of the specific social environment humans inhabit. Small groups, sustained over long periods with deep mutual dependency, exactly the environment in which a reliable, hard-to-fake signal of genuine distress would have enormous social value. Faking tears is possible, but difficult to sustain convincingly. The physiological cascade that produces genuine emotional crying, the specific hormone profile, the particular facial muscle activation, the involuntary nature of the response is significantly harder to replicate deliberately than words. In a group of people who depend on each other for survival, a signal that says, "I am genuinely distressed, not performing distress," is extraordinarily valuable. It allows the group to allocate care and support to the people who actually actually need it, rather than to the most convincing performers. Tears, in this framework, are not a weakness. They are a high-credibility communication channel that evolved because human survival depends on other humans being able to accurately assess each other's emotional states. But this doesn't fully explain crying at films, at songs, at the ending of a book you read alone at midnight with no one watching. The social signaling theory explains why tears communicate distress to others. It doesn't explain why the same mechanism activates when you're watching a fictional character experience something that isn't happening to you, in a context where no one needs to respond to your distress. For that, you need to go deeper into the cognitive evolution that makes humans uniquely susceptible to what researchers call narrative transportation, the experience of being genuinely emotionally present inside a story that you know at every moment isn't real. The same theory of mind that allows humans to model other people's mental states also allows humans to inhabit fictional ones. When you follow a character through a narrative, your brain constructs a real-time model of their beliefs, emotions, and experiences. The same cognitive operation it performs with real people, applied to an imagined one. And because the emotional response system doesn't cleanly distinguish between real and represented experience, the distress you feel for a fictional character activates the same neural pathways as distress for a real person. The tears that follow are not a confusion. They are the correct output of a system doing exactly what it was built to do, responding to the modeled emotional state of another mind. The fact that the mind is fictional is a detail your emotional system doesn't fully process. This is why crying at fiction feels both genuine and slightly embarrassing. It is genuine. The neurological events producing it are real, the chemical payload is real, the emotional experience is real, and it is also a response to something that doesn't exist, which the cognitive part of your brain is fully aware of while the emotional part continues responding anyway. The gap between those two awarenesses is where the embarrassment lives, and the fact that virtually every human who has ever watched a genuinely moving film has experienced exactly this, the simultaneous awareness that it isn't real and the inability to stop responding as if it is, tells you something important about how deeply the emotional response system predates the cognitive one, and how completely it continues to operate on its own terms regardless of what the prefrontal cortex knows. Your ancestors cried. In the firelight after a loss, in the presence of people who needed to know the loss was real. The tears were a signal, and the signal worked. It brought the group closer, reduced aggression, activated care in the people watching. It was one of the most efficient communication tools the human body had ever developed. And then cognitive evolution gave those same humans the ability to model other minds so precisely that fictional ones became emotionally real. And the tears followed the fiction just as faithfully as they had ever followed the fact. Because the system that produces them doesn't ask whether the loss is real. It asks whether the feeling is. And the feeling, it turns out, is always real, even when the story isn't.